Hey guys, Mr. Mulaney here. Gonna walk you through real quick the goals and criteria, some major things to know, so that you are prepared for Tuesday's test. Because I know that a number of questions on the test will deal with the goals and criteria, what they are, how they came to be. So let's start off at the beginning with Madeline Sophie Berra. So everything starts with her, right? She's the one that is the first leader of the Society of the Sacred Heart. It says all these schools. She's amazing. They also set up, like she's the one that sets up and centralizes the plan of studies, determining what would be taught. And as you got from the biography, by the middle of her career, she made sure that all the up and coming nuns, so to speak, were directed by her. So she was able to put her fingerprints on all of the nuns or religious with the Sacred Heart that were teaching in the schools. So every nun that came through very much had that stamp of Madeline Sophie Berra about her. Cool thing, if you didn't know this, Madeline Sophie Berra is an incorruptible. So her body, it was exhumed or dug up years after her death and was found to be miraculously preserved or incorruptible. And so she is hanging out at St. Francis Xavier Church in Paris. If you ever find yourself in Old Paris and want to say hi to the old Reverend Mother, check her out. So, Madeline Sophie sets up the RSCJ. And RSCJ, whenever we say that, it means Society of the Sacred Heart, right? Because it's short for Religieuses du Sacré-Cœur de Jésus. Or in English, Religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. This is the religious order that she set up. So if I say that someone is RSCJ, like, oh, Sister Lucy, she's an RSCJ, that means that she's part of the Society of the Sacred Heart. She is a religious of the Sacred Heart. In English, yeah, we call it the Society of the Sacred Heart, or when people are just speaking casually, they'll just say the Society. It all means the same thing, this religious order that Madeline Sophie helped found. Right now, there are 165 schools across the world, and this is covering just one per continent here, or one per country, right? So this picture of North America means that we have schools in Canada, America, Mexico. If there were markers here for every school, it would be unreadable.
Portree is now closed. All students waiting for rides come to Portree.
Portree is now closed, by the way.
Please exit the building by 5 p.m.
So one of the things that's fun.
Closed. All students waiting for rides come to Portree. All other students, please exit the building by 5 p.m. Thank you.
One of the things that's funny about the Sacred Heart schools is they have a reputation for, wherever they are in the world, having the best real estate. And so Villa Duchesne has like a castle-esque aesthetic. Convent of the Sacred Heart in Manhattan, it was literally a mansion belonging to the inspiration for the Monopoly Man. And Convent of the Sacred Heart in San Francisco was one of the properties belonging to the richest man in San Francisco. He died, and his wife donated the mansion to the Sacred Heart because she hated all the earthquakes. She had a deathly fear of earthquakes. It is right next to a property that was featured in Princess Diaries, I'm told. So, a really cool resource that you should check out on your own is sophie.org. All Sacred Heart related information connects back to sophie.org. That's the website of the Society of the Sacred Heart. So if you ever wanted to find out, like, how much is tuition at Convent of the Sacred Heart in Manhattan, you can find the link to it through sophie.org. I wonder what kind of schools we have in Africa. Sophie.org. Alright, so, no matter where these schools are, right, across the world, the thing that makes it a Sacred Heart school, no matter how different they were, it was that in every school, it was run almost entirely by Sacred Heart religious. From the administration, the faculty, the staff, it was religious sisters up and down. And they were all formed by Madeline Sophie at the beginning, and then by people who were formed by Madeline Sophie later. They all went through the same program. They were all coming with the same vision and same goals. And that's what made it so that no matter where you were, if you ran into someone who went to a Sacred Heart school across the world, you really did share something meaningful in common, and you could have this common set of experiences. But then, bum bum bum. Oh, wait, I have a sound effect. Because that's not dramatic enough, but you get the idea. Two things happened. First off, the 60s. Crazy time in America, in the world. Sex, drugs, rock and roll, Civil Rights Act, space race, all this stuff. British invasion. Society experienced what's known as the Cultural Revolution, or the 60s for shorthand, right? And then the other thing was Vatican II. So this is the Second Vatican Council. This is all the bishops of the Catholic Church gathered together. This only happens on average like once every 100 years or so. And sometimes it'll be 300 years before an ecumenical council is called. This last, most recent one was in the 60s, from 1962 to 65. And all the bishops of the world got together and made some updates to the way that the church runs things, and kind of equipped the church to better preach to the modern world. And so these two things, the 60s and Vatican II, combined so that there were new church-wide rules for how religious orders would govern themselves, and encourage the religious orders to go back to their founding vision, their founders, and find out what would renew the religious order. So one of the church-wide rules that happened actually was that the way that the RSCJ had been running the schools, it was no longer allowed. It was called semi-cloister. You don't need to know that term, but it was halfway between being completely separate from the world and being totally in the world. The church was like, yeah, you got to choose. You got to be either totally apart from the world or totally in it. Semi-cloister is leading to a lot of strange situations. It'll be streamlined if we can just do cloister or non-cloistered. So the RSCJ said, all right, we won't be cloistered. And they decentralized. They no longer were controlled by, the schools at least, were no longer controlled by one leader. A lot of this had to do with the loss of nuns. For some reason, a lot of reasons, following Vatican II, the number of incoming women into the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, it totally dwindled. And they realized pretty quickly, this is bad. Because if the Sacred Heart schools are all run by Sacred Heart nuns or religious, and that's what makes them Sacred Heart schools, what happens when the schools don't have enough Sacred Heart religious to run them? Will they lose their identity as Sacred Heart schools? And this, at the most darkest moment of the story, that's when the genius of the RSCJ really shines through. And what they did was they figured out, we can pass the torch. And this is symbolizing here the RSCJ passing on their mission and their identity to the laity. Laity is a fancy word that just means people who aren't professed religious or vowed religious. So, yeah, I'm lay, you're lay, we're all lay. Or we're part of the laity. What the RSCJ did was they figured out, you know what? We can enable people who aren't technically part of the Sacred Heart, who aren't religious of the Sacred Heart, we can help them pass on our mission and our identity just like we've been doing. And they created this whole system. They were like, you know what? It won't be enough, like lay people, they won't be able to spend a year in the novitiate like we did, or several years in many cases. They need help running the schools as Sacred Heart schools. We'll create a system that really quickly and concisely describes what we're about. And that's how we get the goals and criteria. The goals and criteria are the mission of all Sacred Heart schools, right? 5 goals. This was 1975, less than 10 years after the council ended. They were already figuring out, we need to, the way we've been doing things won't work in the future. And in order to prevent all of these awesome schools from closing or stop being Sacred Heart, we'll create the goals and criteria. In 1975, they were first published, and it was everything that they believed went into being Sacred Heart in as simple a formula as possible. So Madeline Sophie Barra, if you were to ask her, oh, Madeline Sophie, what are the goals and criteria? She would have had no idea what you're talking about. These came way after her, right? 110 years after her. But they are all about what she saw as the goal of education. So if you were to talk to Madeline Sophie about what are the most important things that a Sacred Heart school should impart, she would use language very similar to the 5 goals. The criteria are just the specific ways each goal should be achieved. So if you study the goals and criteria, go to your student handbook or some similar source and look for the goals and criteria. Each goal has 5, 6 different criteria underneath it. For instance, schools of the Sacred Heart commit themselves to educate to a personal and active faith in God. Goal 1. The criteria are: the entire school program explores one relationship to God, to self, to others, to all creation. Opening themselves to the transforming power of the Spirit of God, members of the school community engage in personal and communal prayers, reflection, and action. So it's not enough to just say personal and active faith in God. The criteria are there to be like, here's what personal and active faith looks like, a little more specifically. The members of the school community pray, both personally and communally. So, the beautiful thing about the goals and criteria is that you got the best of both worlds. Like Hannah Montana the situation. They figured out a way to keep the RSCJ charism, or the unique spiritual gift and identity, that was part of all these schools and what made them great. But they also made it more flexible. You didn't have to be RSCJ to teach in the schools and be really effective at communicating the mission. You didn't have to have a school staffed entirely by Religious of the Sacred Heart. And this allowed more lay leadership of the schools and to go in different directions. So a practical, effective way for the laity to lead more schools and do it in the way that was best for them. So diversity. You got unity and diversity all in one package. So for instance, ground floor. Duchesne Academy is, as far as I know, the only Sacred Heart school that has an entire floor of the building dedicated to student use and Goal 5. That's one way, that it's not the only way, but it's one major way that we show our commitment to Goal 5. It's not possible for nearly any other school, I don't think, to have an entire floor of the building dedicated to that. But each school will find its own way to do this. Maybe it's more open campus rules, or the spaces that will belong to the students in their own way, or certain hours of the day will be student use. It's each school is going to figure out the best way to live out the goals and criteria. And both of these, the motto and the mission, are connected to the goals and criteria. These are just, the goals and criteria serve the mission of the RSCJ to glorify the heart of Jesus. And the RSCJ motto, Cor Unum et Anima Una in Corde Jesu, one heart and one soul in the heart of Jesus. So notice, you get unity and diversity with the goals and criteria. So we are one heart, one soul in the heart of Jesus. And we can do the things that we do best to glorify the heart of Jesus that only our school can do. Alright, doesn't end there though. The cherry on top of this Sunday of Sacred Heart awesomeness is Chicago. Say it with me, Chicago. It stands for the Sacred Heart Commission on Goals. This is a 5-year cycle. Every network school, every Sacred Heart network school examines how well they're meeting the goals over the course of 5 years. and it involves a visit from this all-star elite team of Sacred Heart educators from around the country, and they come in and they look at how well you have examined your own living out of the goals, and they help you develop a plan for the future, an action plan on how you can improve your commitment to the goals and criteria. So right now we're in an exciting phase of this. We are in year 1 of Chicago, and we are finishing up I guess we're in the end of year 1, starting year 2. The Chicago Steering Committee at Duchesne is finalizing our year-long self-studies. We spent all year developing it, listening to everybody, asking questions about how well we're living out the goals. And they're putting it into this master document. Later this year, we'll get this visit from the Chicago visiting team, and they'll spend a couple days in the school looking at what we're doing, talking to people, talking to you, and they'll give a report at the end of it, and it helps us develop a plan for the future. Here's the beautiful thing about it. Here's what I love about this. It forces schools to become more and more Sacred Heart. At no point in Chicago, because of Chicago, at no point in a school's history can it just be like, yeah, we got the Sacred Heart thing covered. We can focus on other things now. For the Sacred Heart schools, it's this constant process of becoming more and more similar to the heart of Jesus. Becoming more and more Sacred Heart. That's so cool. And speaking as a teacher, things like the goals and criteria in Chicago, this is absolutely brilliant. And schools like Marion, schools like Prep, they look to the RSCJ, the Sacred Heart schools, as a model of how to pass on the mission to lay people and teachers like myself. So it's really cool. So with that in mind, I'm just going to wrap up real quick with a description of the 5 goals. Actually, this has been 20 minutes. I'm going to give you a break. We'll cover this on Monday. So yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be ready for a quiz on everything up to this point on Monday. Multiple choice questions, 5 to 10. And yeah, see you then.